Hey folks, I'm back with part two of this, but like I was saying, one of the major differences about anime, about Japanese animation, anime and ours, and the rest of the world sometimes, is you're bound to see, like I mentioned in part one, you're bound to see them do things and use things and do things that normally you don't see that much in other kinds of animation. I talked about the whole transformation and shape-shifting deal that I've mentioned beforehand in other videos, but another thing that really makes them stand out, and I consider them to be, when you add this to it, I consider them to be like the king of anime, or kings of animation, and that is what's known as the fusion. I was talking about this at the end, the fusion, the merger. And like I said at the end of part one, I'm not talking the merging of combining robots and stuff like that. No. I'm talking about the fusion of two characters as one. Two human or anamorphic-like characters as one. Now you might say to yourself, well, what do you mean by that? Well, let's put it this way. Let's say, okay, well basically let's put it this way. A fusion, okay, it's like, okay, when you fuse, it's like if you take two metal bars, alright, and you decide, okay, I want a longer bar, right? You basically use your welding machine, you take your torch or your welding machine and you weld those two together. Basically, you fuse them together, right? Or if you have surgery, and let's say the doctor's got to fuse a bone fragment, got to take a bone fragment from one of your bodies, if you will, and fuse it. I mean, not one of your bodies, but take a bone fragment from one of the sections of your body, and basically fuse that bone fragment into the place that needs to be repaired. Or let's say they have some kind of plastic or metal, whatever, and they need to fuse it in, weld it in, fuse it in, whatever you want to call it. That's basically sort of the example you're getting, because what's happening is the bone, when it gets fused in, becomes part of that section, becomes one with that, in time becomes one with your body. That part of your body. Same with if you had to have hip surgery or something like that. Plastic hip surgery or whatever. The plastic hip, when put into you, becomes part of your body. Even though you know it's there, it's fused in, you know it's there. The point is, I know those are kind of strange examples, but the point is, when you have something fused together with another something, it becomes one. It's fused together, it becomes one. It merges together, it becomes one. Like I said, example being the middle rods. You want a longer rod, you got two short ones, like one right here, one right here. You want to put them together, but you can't. You got to fuse them together. You got to weld them together. That's basically sort of like what goes on with the fusion in animation, especially when it comes to anime, because, let's face it, like I said, they're the kings of anime. They're the kings when it comes to this kind of stuff. And like I said in the last video, this has been going on for years, ever since anime and manga began. I mean, heck, if you want a real good example, there's been several episodes of Gatchaman, known here in the U.S. as Battle of the Planets, where you've had all 5 characters fuse into a big flying, glowing phoenix-like bird, I believe, if I'm correct in that. So, it's not the first time that's happened. It's not the first time this has happened. But throughout the 80s and most notably the 90s, you got the 80s, the 90s, most notably the 90s, and mostly in the past few decades and stuff, you've had animes coming out of Japan where this has actually happened. It's no joke. I mean, you look on TV tropes, you type in fusion dance, and you'll get and you click on anime and manga, you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about. And sometimes the animes, the fusions sometimes and the mergers are a little bit more different than usual. Sometimes they're like switching in and switching out. A good example of, let's say, a switch in and switch out would be Birdie, the anime Birdie. In case some of you don't know the story about that, it's kind of complicated. There's two different versions of it. The manga version has her trying to hide what she's done, and the anime version has her fessing up to what she's done and both basically taking the same punishment. The punishment is she's got to allow the person that she's injured to share her body with her. So in other words, the person is fused or merged into her, and thus, even though she's the more dominant one, it allows her and the individual she's fused with to switch back and forth. And we're not talking about, switch by voice and all that. No, we're talking about switch bodies. In other words, okay, like let's say I'm that individual, Birdie could switch from me into her, just like that. I know that's a strange example, but you kind of get what I'm saying. But in turn, when there was, and basically when Birdie would do this is because something had to be taken care of, like there was a evil that had to be fought or a crime that needed to be stopped or whatever. So when there's no activity going on, she at times will switch back into the male, that's right, it's a male, so that boy, the male, the guy, can spend time with his family. Again, it's kind of strange, but that's kind of that's basically a type of fusion that we're talking about, or immersion. One of the best examples, as everybody's obviously been talking about when it comes to this kind of stuff, is Dragon Ball Z. Obviously, you see a lot of that in Dragon Ball Z. There's no doubt. And there's so many examples that I read and I could list off, but I'll provide a link down below to the TV tropes in both description boxes and in the playlist so you guys can see it for yourself. But it's just so many examples. Examples really come in. And it's not, and one of the examples they give you is it's not just, the merging and the fusing, they're becoming one entity. No. Sometimes what they do in Japanese anime, especially with something like, say, Dragon Ball, one of the fusion elements, or one of the unique, it's a fusion element, but one of the unique differences, because there are different kinds of fusions and mergings, according to, with Japanese anime, in Japanese anime, and of course it's been seen here in the States as well, in Western animation. There's no doubt about that. But one of the things that you've seen is in Dragon Ball, what I think is obviously more, some of the Western animated cartoons out here kind of got the idea. Basically, a fusion or a merger is basically sometimes a character gets absorbed into another character, and sometimes that absorption will allow that character to take on some traits physically and mentally of that character. Or sometimes, in the case of, let's say, a Dragon Ball villain like Cell, when he absorbs somebody, there's no differences. Yeah, his appearance changes and everything, but there's no traits, there's no personality differences at all. There's no personality or mental trait differences or anything. Basically, when the person gets absorbed by Cell, they become like a power boost. They boost up his power, and that's why he changes in appearance. Again, with the exception that there's no, physical or mental change at all. It's just, hey, I absorb, like for example, one of the most watched vids on YouTube is Cell absorbing Android 18. Yeah, it's crazy. He absorbs Android 18, and we don't see her for another, I guess, couple of weeks or so, almost to the end of that season. Till he has to, somehow he ends up regurgitating her after an attack on him. But the point is, it's not, but the point is, this is a different kind of fusion, because sometimes a fusion can just be somebody being fused together to be like a power boost for another individual. And there's a lot, again, you'll look at that list and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. You see exactly what I'm talking about. Another example of evolution, if you will, well, not evolution, but another example of fusion, and speaking of evolution, is Digimon. Basically, I guess you could call it Digimon 2 or whatever you want, Season 2, whatever you want to call it, where you had all these newer Digimon come out, like with characters like Davis and older Kari and TK and stuff like that. Another one was called, another part of fusion that was introduced in that show was DNA evolution, or digital evolution. It allowed two Digimon to fuse together. I'm not lying. And they would become this one character. And here's where another element of the fusion or the merging that Japanese animation made popular was the fact that when they come together as one and they form into this new form, they can actually speak in unison. They speak with both the voices at the same time, but in unison. Sometimes that doesn't happen, but it does. Now, the Digimon thing would continue this on in the following seasons, where you would have, like, say, Rika and Renamon in following seasons, in their season, if you will, merge together to become one force. And then you would have, in later seasons, in a finale, you would have all the Digimon tamers merge together with one Digimon and become one entity, even though, according to the TV tropes, this one entity would only speak with the two main, with the unified voice of both the main protagonist, Tamer, and Digimon, which is kind of weird. Now, again, like I said, there's just so many to list off. Again, I'll provide the links so you guys can see this, so you can guys read it for yourselves. But but the reason I bring this up as well is because I mentioned this in my anime recommendation video. The new anime that's come out this year, at the beginning of this year, Vivid Red Operation, is another example of that as well, because basically you have 4 characters, maybe 5, depending on how many characters are on this hero team, this Vivid Operation team. They're kind of like, as a lot of people put it, they're basically like a more techno, scientific version of a magical girl, like Sailor Moon and stuff. And basically what it is, and I mentioned this, and I'm not going to talk about it too long because I mentioned this in my anime recommendation. Basically, you have the main protagonist, basically the leader girl, if you will, as the main Vivid operator. And all her teammates, basically, like her, have different colored outfits. And what they do, basically, when they have to fight off a bigger, stronger enemy, if you will, and they can't do it individually by themselves, what they do is they have to merge and fuse with her. Excuse me, I'll be right back.